Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Camera Houses, Behind the Cut and Cue, storytelling through editing and music panel. My name is John Philpot, editor on projects including Hacks, Dying for a Sex, and Theater Camp. I'm excited to be here today talking to an amazing lineup of creatives, all with projects premiering during the 2025 Tribeca Film Festival. This panel will explore how post-production creatives shape story through picture and sound, revealing how each cut, cue, and creative decision brings a project to life. So, without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. She is the editor behind Horsegirls, Stephanie Filo. He is the composer for Jacob Reed and Me, Danny Walter. And last but not least, she is the editor on The Last Dive, Lauren Brinkman. Okay, so all three of your projects are so different and unique. Before we dive in, would each of you just give me a little synopsis of the project you're on to give the viewer some context? Let's start with you, Lauren.
So the film is called The Last Dive, and it's about a diver, Terry Kennedy, who is in his 80s and is returning to this remote island to find his long lost best friend, Willie the manta ray. And Willie is a 20-foot manta ray who he had a 30-year friendship with. And Terry recorded this friendship over 20 to 30 years. So he had this incredible archive. And the film explores the relationship between man and manta ray and what that was like and how it transformed his life
Man at Manta Ray. All right.
in the world.
Let's go with Danny next.
Yeah, so Jacob Reed and Me, it's hard to describe in such a short blurb as Lauren just gave, because it is a pretty unique podcast. Jacob, his background is as a film director. He was working on Jimmy Kimmel Live as a segment director when COVID hit, and that work all came to a halt, and he suddenly found himself jobless and sort of facing kind of like a midlife crisis and lockdown. And he has somewhat common of a name, and he had received over the years a lot of outreach for people looking for a different Jacob Reed. And so he started keeping this list of all these different Jacob Reeds, and he had a list of like 740 of them. And with all this time in COVID, I think he had this sort of like back burner project, which was to start figuring out who some of these Jacob Reeds were, and given the context of this midlife crisis, like, oh, what if I hadn't stopped playing piano? Oh, what if I'd gone to medical school? Like each one of them sort of represented this path not taken. And so the podcast is sort of like each episode is a dive into both like the life of someone with the same name, but also there's this personal element of like what does it each of those stories mean for Jacob personally?
Fun. All right, and Stephanie will go with you.
Yeah, so I'm here with a film called Horsegirls. It is about a 22-year-old neurodivergent woman named Margarita, who is obsessed with horses and has a very tight-knit relationship with her mom, who basically has an illness that has returned. So it's kind of a coming of age story as she learns how to kind of navigate the world on her own. And then in the midst of doing all this, she discovers hobby horsing. So she discovers a new hobby within all of it. So yeah, it's ultimately a relationship story about her and her mom, and also about this very quirky, unique sport.
Nice. All right, so a couple more questions for you, Stephanie. So, like your award-winning work on We Grown Now, Horse Girls follows the perspective of a young person forced to grow up in the world around them. So, what kinds of considerations go into editing a film that aims at capturing the experience of youth?
I mean, I think a lot of stories about young people that we've seen feel like they're being told by adults. I think that just happens very regularly. And so something that particularly in those two films, but in general, I think is important as editors is to kind of try to get into the headspace of these younger people and try to figure out maybe what the experiencing the world around them feels like. And a lot of times that's maybe like sonically just through sound. I know within We Grown Now, the boys are living in like 16-story high-rise towers. And so it was like, okay, as a kid, like you're really kind of hearing all these different things. There's all these different floors above and below them. And so we kind of built out that world in a way where we're like, okay, that we're not saying like specifically what's happening. You're hearing it happening around them as they're experiencing it. And I think we kind of did a similar thing with Horsegirls where Margarita, our main character, has a lot of like sensory overload moments as well. So it's kind of just like figuring out a way within the soundscape to build out how she's feeling the world around her, how she's experiencing the world around her. And sometimes that was, visually but a lot of times it was like how, if she's kind of hearing everything and like overloaded with everything, how would she be feeling that? And also just kind of exploring in both of those films the nuance because they're both about, yes, they're about younger people, but they're about kind of underrepresented groups of people as well. So how do you kind of find that nuance, especially as younger people? And so within the edit, I think a lot of our approach was kind of about just feeling like getting into their headspace and like reflecting on like what we were like at that age. How was I experiencing the world at 22 and how would it be different for somebody like Margarita? And I think I think it helps a lot, but it's important for all of us kind of ethically as well as editors to kind of face our stories that way, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah. I like the idea of like, it is kind of one little part of the whole editorial thing, like the sound component. I mean, it can be like it's kind of technically 50% of what we do, So while we are picture editors, sound is deeply important, especially when you get into things where you need to get further into the character's, mind. Okay, so Lauren, there's something intimate about editing a story built on memory and legacy. What was it like shaping a narrative that blends decades-old archival footage with present-day verite and underwater cinematography of said manta ray?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you could say about that, but I would say when someone gives you 20 years of their life in archive, it's very intimate. Like you learn a lot. And the person like Terry just like he gave the filmmaker Cody and myself so much trust. Um, to be able to depict his life this way, because not only is he in his 80s and going back for something that really meant it's sort of the culmination of his hopes and wishes in his 80s. And so not only is he trusting the filmmaker to do that, but he trusted us by essentially looking back at his entire life and painting that portrait honestly with sensitivity and so on. So um yeah, like weaving together those two narratives was really interesting. And I had experience with doing that somewhat on a previous documentary where the main subject was an older gentleman who also was sort of reliving these like glory days sort of episodes of his past. So this was the second time around where I was kind of doing this narrative of interweaving present day with past episodes in archival. But then you added the underwater dives, which added so much like adventure to this story. And I think the film just feels really unique because of that, because you have the two sort of expected like narrative threads of like present day and past, but then you also have this like sort of Indiana Jones-esque aspect where he's going underwater and he's encountering sharks. He's 80, but he's like encountering sharks and like doing these extremely dangerous dives, all for the sake of finding this friend of his, who means so much to him. So, as an editor, it was like a really great privilege to be able to work with something that was so special to someone, the subject, but also to be able to bring to life these incredible creatures who you see on screen, these manta rays who it's really hard to capture them in film, quite frankly. Like I've spoken to the director at length about how when he dives with the manta rays, it's like the ocean goes quiet. And they're these majestic, almost alien beings that come up and have this curiosity about humans. And any communication between the two species is like completely through touch or electricity or something like that. So we tried our best to capture that. I tried my best to capture that in the edit by like quieting, like the director wanted to quiet the sound when the mantis first showed up. And, um, he wanted to bring the ocean back to life as soon as the manta rays left. So we were kind of playing around with some creative things in the edit to really highlight how special the manta rays are. But um, yeah, like I guess as in the editor, it was just a lot of fun to work with that alongside the more traditional look back documentaries that maybe we have seen before.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much footage you probably had to sift through. I mean,
Hmm.
documentary is very much like it's an editor's medium, in my humble opinion. The ability to like scan through just hours and hours of probably just ocean footage where they're trying to find the manta ray or get a good shot of some flying bird like fish thing.
Totally. There's a lot of footage not only in the archives but also underwater because they spent a lot of time in the sea trying to like, just trying to find Willie, and there's a lot to work with there. So
Yeah.
yeah, but we got a couple good shots. So
Great.
I'm excited.
All right, so Danny, unlike film or television where visuals guide the experience, podcasts live entirely in sound. So this is like a heavy lift. So how did how did that level of intimacy shape what you thought about the atmosphere and the pacing and or the restraint on the music? I mean, you're kind of like the picture in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I think it's at the end of the day, it's just all about the storytelling. And so I think you have to compose a piece of music that's very adaptable because it's going to be reused in so many different ways, so many different times. And that means the music is unobtrusive, um, but at the same time, it has like some sort of very distinct character. I talk a lot when I'm working with clients about composing music that feels endemic to the work. And so that usually means finding some element. There's of course the emotional tone, but there's always also finding some element it's almost like you're doing sonic branding for each film or podcast or whatever it is has its own brand, and that brand is rooted in the actual sounds that you use to make the music. And so in the case of this podcast, I think uh, it it's very much like an investigative podcast, and so you sort of have this investigative music that feels like there's something unfolding. There's always something more to what you're hearing. Like there's going to be, oh, the floor, we thought the floor was here, and actually the floor is there. And so that's more of a tone than it is like you know, a journey from one place to another. Um, and so yeah, and you really have to stay out of the way, even though the music is um, you think it's going to play an even bigger role than something with visual, but also, at the end of the day, it's really all about what somebody is saying. So it's a very fine line that you have to walk, but uh, I don't know, it didn't feel that different from scoring to picture in a lot of ways. Because at the end of the day, it's just about the story, the sort of emotional space of the work, and how do you just create that unique world. So in a lot of ways, I felt like I was maybe worried about that kind of thing, but I felt myself using all the same tools at the end of the day that I would use for something visual.
Great. That's really cool. I mean, were you out there in the like backyard, like bowing, like a garden hose or something like that? Or,
No,
I
it
don't
was
know how that ties in with Jacob Reed finding his inner self, but
the podcast is it's like almost like a little bit like a neurotic like Nathan for you kind of thing at its core, but except Jacob's like a lot more relatable as a person. But so there's a lot of sort of like nerd shoe leather, I guess you could call it, where like you're like tearing pieces of paper after writing down like somebody's phone number, or you're scribbling like a thought or an idea about like how to find this person whose name is Jacob Reed, and you have like three clues about them. Um, there's like, so but it serves two purposes, one being uh, that it feels intimate because these are intimate sounds, like the very dry sound of the piece of paper being torn, and the sound of the keyboard clacking like close to your ear, like quietly. Um, so so emotionally, it serves to root us in this sort of like somewhat neurotic journey of like an individual who is like on a pretty strange quest. But emotionally, and then we're on the ride, so it doesn't feel so strange. It feels like, you're cyber stalking somebody. Like everybody has their own, shameful moments of cyber stalking.
cool. I love it. I want to open this up a little bit. So post-production can feel a little solitary, where we kind of sit in rooms. I know I do. I sit in a room by myself alone. Occasionally I'll have my assistant on Zoom or something like that and just we'll chat. But and then inevitably a director or producer or something comes into the situation, and it becomes incredibly collaborative. How does this collaboration show up in your project, whether it's directors, fellow creatives on the projects, or even with the footage and the voices themselves?
I feel
Let's
like on Horse Girls, it was such a super collaborative project, and partially that's because we I cut that from home. It was a work from home situation. I cut it in like my bedroom, but my director would come to my house every day, play with my dog every single day. So it's almost like you develop this like familial relationship where you're just kind of like constantly chatting with each other. And I think the rest of our team was also just super open and collaborative as well. So like our producers, we would constantly be like texting at like 2 in the morning, which is probably not what you're supposed to do, but we just had that dynamic. We had so many, like we had a few different friends and family screenings. And we would all just kind of sit and go through everything. We had all these spreadsheets and go through every single note together, just try to kind of decipher, especially just given the nature of what this story was, we wanted to make sure we were approaching it sensitively. And it's also based on a true story of one of our producers, actually, her and her or her sister and her mom. And so it's like we just spent so much time just kind of talking back and forth, trying to make sure that we were honoring that kind of the true elements of that story, but also just making sure we weren't doing a disservice to the neurodivergent community at large and the horse girl community at large. So I think it was just like the work from home nature of it just made it super, super collaborative in that way. So we're just like, let's just get this thing done. And we had a tiny, tiny time window to get it done as well. So it just kind of almost forces collaboration, if that makes sense.
100%. It's like all hands on deck.
Yep.
What about you,
My
Lauren?
dog as well.
Yeah, and your dog, yes.
Yeah.
How did you and the, creative heads on this one like collaborate?
Yeah. So I actually only worked in person with Cody, the director, a couple times. Cody's probably sick of me telling everyone this, but he lives on a boat. He lives on a boat in the middle of the ocean. And I that sounds like my personal worst nightmare, but that's, like he's an adventurer, and that's how he found this story and this character. And so we collaborated remotely the whole time. But there would be like a couple days where he's like, I have to go dark. There's a hurricane. I got to make sure we're prepped. So that was rare, but it's just like a very idiosyncratic kind of situation. And but Cody and I were in constant communication, and I'm sure his wife is sick of hearing me on speakerphone because they live on a boat, so she probably heard everything too. But the producers also, there were two producers who were with this company, Random Good, and they facilitated a couple of in-person meetups for Cody and I. So they sponsor Cody and I to come out to like retreats once in a while. And that's where we got some in-person time because the edit lasted for about 10 to 11 months, I want to say, like from January to we really locked picture in December, but it was a little bit intermittent towards the end. But there were a couple of times when we got together in person, we were able to edit in person. So that was great. But I would say like because of the remote nature of it, we were just like constantly on the phone, but it worked out.
I love it. Cody is putting my apartment to shame with the boat. Way to go.
Yeah, it's probably maybe his boat is bigger than your apartment, actually. He's got a nice one.
Oh, okay. Way to go, Cody.
Depends. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what was nice about this one is Jacob and I have known each other and worked together on things for a long time. So by the time we were working on this project together, we had something like 15 years of past collaborations to reference. And then in a way, that was sort of the shortcut that we took to the tone, where there was this like TV pitch that I worked on where he had made this pilot about um, like sort of Big Lebowski-esque in a way about like a stoner like pizza delivery guy who like unwittingly stumbles into all these situations and becomes like a pseudo detective, um, sort of like against his own, it's not like he's trying to do that, it's just happening. And so like I made that score had all these like rhythmic elements that were related to like weed smoking sounds, like a bong and like other things like that. So for whatever reason, when he was working on this, that like popped into his head as like, I feel like that was the tone for this show. Not the bong part, but like the neurotic, like sort of like stumbling into revelation part. And so yeah, and it was a COVID project in that like that's when he started working on it. And so there was a um there was a like we were supposed to get together. We hadn't seen each other in a little while. And then it was like everything started shutting down. We were like, maybe like 3 weeks from now we'll get together or something. And like obviously that didn't happen. And then but then he was like, well, look, we're not getting together, but I have this project I started working on in lockdown. And, because we couldn't get together in person, but we had that shorthand and that history, it was a pretty seamless um, thing to find the direction. And that's the nice thing about when, you have those years of history with someone.
I love it. I love it. I love the long-term relationships. The ones that I have, they're like invaluable, It's like not only is it like you kind of keep each other together and keep the projects going, it's like job security and friendship all in once. So, to Stephanie, your career encompasses intimate indies like Horsegirls and superhero epics like Daredevil Born Again. How does working at such different scales shape your approach to each project?
I mean, I love as much as I can bouncing between different genres because I feel like it gives us different toolkits that we can bring to each one. Um, interestingly, there were a lot of parallels between Daredevil and Horse Girls because, while he is a superhero, he's also a visually impaired superhero. And that comes with figuring out different ways of approaching the material. In Matt Murdock or Daredevil's sense, he experiences different sensory moments where he's hearing the world around him and kind of like determining where and when things are happening. And there was so much thought put into how we approached that on the series. But also, interestingly enough, within Horse Girls, Margarita also experiences these sensory moments, and so I think it was surprisingly um, very helpful to be like, okay, how did we approach hearing the world in different ways on that series versus in Horse Girls? And maybe there's things that we could bring to that. Um, Visually, in Horse Girls, there's moments where the camera, when she's like experiencing kind of sensory overload, where the camera will kind of be blurred around her. Um, and sonically, we would kind of play with the audio in a way where it's like it almost, the minute it happens, it's like she almost hears like a ringing tinnitus sound similar to Matt Murdock and Daredevil. And she would hear kind of everything, like a overload of everything around her. So you would hear almost more pronounced versions of kind of every sound within the room or within the space. And then it would slowly ease down into like back down into one. So it was really about kind of like, or at least in comparing those two, it was about like figuring out a way that those different characters would experience the world around them, but experience them in a more heightened way, and how that would evolve, or how that would quickly heighten and then like slowly evolve into normal as well. Um, so yeah, it's a perfect instance of like where, bouncing between totally different projects might actually be helpful. It was something where I was like, I never would have expected this, expected them to be similar, but they were in that sense. And I think it kind of applies across the board on any other project. There's always something that you aren't expecting where you're like, oh, I used this on like a comedy like several years ago, but somehow it's relevant in this drama, or just stuff like that. So um yeah, I tend to try to bring as much of those little moments in as I can, and what I learned from the other projects into the new ones.
That's great. The tool bag. I love
Yeah.
the tool bag. It's
Yeah.
probably if someone were to like really get critical on all the things that I've done, they'd probably be like, you did this same thing over here. And like,
Mhm. Well, it's always so funny because it's like you might be working on, say, like I don't know, like a comedy moment, and you're like, oh, I think like a horror sting would be great here. Like somehow it's relevant.
yeah.
But
Lauren, the film walks the line between adventurous spirit and tender introspection. How did you use editing to maintain that tonal balance without losing either side of the story?
Hmm, very deep question. Yeah, well, I think the I think that really mm, is most prevalent in the way that I cut the dive sequences. Because when Terry is underwater is when the story does become the most adventurous. Um, but there are also those moments of deep spirituality in the dives themselves. So there were several dives throughout the so like Terry goes to the island and there's this like really fun adventure sequence where like the boat's gearing up and it's leaving the dock and it's setting out for this like dangerous island in the middle of the ocean, and they get there and it's like dangerous to anchor, and like it's a volcanic island and it's barren and it's creepy and weird, and then they dive underwater and it's just like it's paradise, like beautiful fish and sea creatures of all kinds, and the biodiversity is incredible. And so we were able to sort of juxtapose the real danger of diving, because it's quite a dangerous sport, especially for those who aren't initiated. At Terry, the main character's level, it's quite safe because he knows exactly what he's doing and he has so much experience. But going that deep underwater is it, humans, there's a lot of equipment you need to do that. And it's quite a dangerous thing. And you also have to have your wits about you because that area in particular has a lot of sharks. It's sharks and manta rays are actually related in the evolutionary tree. And so where there are manta rays, there are also lots of sharks. And some of them are people eaters. They eat seals, they eat anything that's fleshy and tasty. And so this area of the world, you do have to have your wits about you when you're underwater for that reason too. And so um, going back to a previous point that I had mentioned is that you have this mix of like both wonder and danger underwater, but when the manta rays arrive, um, everyone is just, overwhelmed. And there's a couple sequences where you get that spirituality with the manta rays. I would say in the first dive, when he first sees the manta rays, is when we lean the most into that emotion. And then he does several more dives for Willie, and um, it's not until the end of the film where we re-embrace like the heightening the bond between like the man and the animal. So hopefully that answered the question, but
Yeah,
yeah.
you're kind of like, you know, with the scenes that you have, you're trying to kind of piece together something that, brings us to brings us tension, but also brings us closer to the character and in these dangerous situations, right? So I guess did you find yourself like scrambling a bunch of stuff in order to kind of heighten that? Was that kind of part of your method?
Yeah, definitely because on like the biggest challenge about cutting this film was the fact that when they're underwater, there's no audio. You divers can't communicate. It's a completely visual edit. And so the um yeah, the visual storytelling completely relied on being able to cut to the right look or the right motion or and stringing together actions that would direct a narrative and direct attention underwater. So, so yeah, there were times when like I was cutting really fast because there was something really scary happening. And then there are other times when we would slow it all down and the manta rays just take up the frame for like 30 seconds. So, the pace of the edit is really like it helped cue in the audience exactly what was going on because, there was no way to narrate what was happening. I either had to show it or I had to show it through pacing. So,
Very cool. Danny, um, Jacob Reed and Me is deeply personal, but also taps into a universal kind of questioning about like who we are and why. Did you think about the broader emotional resonance of that search as you built the musical themes?
Yeah, I'd say anytime I'm working on something, I think in terms of story structure, and in particular, I think about what I always call the dramatic space. So there, I usually think there are like maybe two poles or maybe three that are defining the sort of emotional world of the project. And in this case, it's there's a reversal in all things. There's usually like a reversal that happens with the catharsis, and that's going between those two, ends. And so in the case of this project, there's the kind of like anxiety of questioning, and then on the other hand, there's the revelation of self-discovery that comes through the process of figuring out who this person is, searching for them, maybe meeting them, maybe interviewing them. So, on the one hand, we have that kind of like anxious shoot, what I was calling like neurotic shoe leather or whatever, nerd shoe leather. And then the flip side is a kind of open and revelatory sort of inverse of it that has a lot of the same timbres, a lot of the same sort of little um, quirky sounds that keep us rooted in Jacob's uh, perspective, um, uh, with that the intimacy of like being on his journey. But yeah, there's like an open sort of a feeling of relief, at knowing a little more about yourself and feeling like a little bit of relief from the search. So that was sort of the to me that was like the way to capture uh, that drama.
That's great. So everyone, so much of what happens in post is about discovering what the project wants to be. So I wanted to ask everyone this next question. How much of your process is planned versus discovered in the cut or in the sound? I know for me, it's discovered. I don't know. I try to plan, but I don't know. Let's start with Stephanie.
I mean, similar to you, John. Like I'll try. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have like temp score I'm like, I'll just pull some things that I know for a fact I'm gonna need, but the footage really dictates what it wants to be, and I think we've all worked on projects where maybe it's like we envisioned it cutting a certain way, and then the footage looks very different than maybe what we in our minds envisioned it being. So you kind of have to sit and solve different puzzle pieces, but that's kind of the fun of editing, in my opinion, is like how can I kind of like mirror what the intention is and what I envisioned it being with this new footage that I have. Um, that definitely was the case on Horse Girls because they shot it a very specific way, and when I read the script, I read it a totally different way. And the way they shot it was beautiful. It's just like figuring out how you combine those two ideas in one place, and it makes it kind of a fun experiment every day.
It's always a puzzle.
Mhm.
Lauren, discover or planned it out? Did you knew how it was going to be done before you even cut it?
Mm, yeah, well, it's a documentary, so we had to plan it as soon as we went into the edit as to like how we wanted to lay out the story. But um in terms of like the creative elements, I yeah, like I'm not a diver, and so I didn't really know what it would sound like underwater. But I want to plug the sound designer here because the sound designer, Kim Christensen, he got diving certified for this film. And he went and recorded all of his own original audio. And so I cut the dives visually and then, attempted some bubble sounds. And then he went in and he actually like built out this soundscape to actually mimic how it feels when you're underwater. And I just thought that like he went so above and beyond in order to kind of build that out for people. And yeah, like that was totally beautiful and not something that I could have brought to the table, but he's such an expert in that and he really kind of took it upon himself to bring that experience to life. But yeah, like it there's like probably less room for like creative sound design in docs than there is in scripted, but you still find those moments like Terry is a very funny person, and so whenever we cut his backstories and we use his we were relaying like he has a colorful past as a Hell's Angel associate, and he had the Doors play at this like dive bar that he ran back in Los Angeles. And this was all in his prior life before he became friends with the giant manta ray. So when we were depicting his colorful past, we were able to get really funky with the music choices and with the sound design. To kind of, yeah, just to show how colorful, like just to show how colorful he was. So yeah, it was a fun challenge, but it was a chance to get creative.
Sounds like it. That is epic. Danny, what about you?
you know how it is. It's you plan and sometimes that was right and sometimes that was just like step one and you had to throw out a bunch of things and that was just the process. Again, I think because Jacob and I have such a history of collaboration, there was something we could point to that was like, I think this is kind of the tone, you know? And then uh, as a composer, sometimes it's like I turn something over and then like it's just like uh, I'm sort of done. And other times it's just endless revisions. This was one of those things where uh, that early instinct was just sort of spot on. But I think in general with projects, um, as a composer, sometimes it's nice. In this case, you know, because I was involved so early, like from when he was starting to put everything together. Um, it's nice to be, I feel like it can be really generative to have those music conversations and even do some of the work much earlier in the process than people often do. You know, so often composers are being brought in when there's already a rough cut or there's already a fine cut, there's already a deadline, there's already like distribution and a release date or a festival premiere, and it's like it's a little bit like doing the job. Look, like that is the job as a composer, like you're doing stuff like that all the time. But the creatively as artists, like we're doing our job a little bit with one hand behind our backs. I feel when we're working that way because it can be such a generative process to bring the music in earlier because it can open up different ways of achieving what we need to do in each moment to for the story to be satisfying and um, touch, you know, each point that it needs to touch for the arc to work. Um, but yeah, like the anyway, so in this case, the planning or whatever you want to call it, I mean, it's not quite like editing a documentary, which is um, which I know is like I think the story is this, and then you actually start to put that together, and you're like, well, why isn't this working, or why isn't this satisfying? You know, with the music, it's like you can spit out like 20 different ideas, in a week. So it's a little quicker. But yeah, it was nice that that early instinct that Jacob had, I think, was kind of spot on. And then because of our shorthand, and whatever, like I feel like it was a very quick fit. Um, and so that's always nice. That's always nice.
That is nice. I love it when that happens. That's
Yeah.
every once in a while, you're just like, okay, we figured it out. Round two, it does happen, but then there were probably other parts where you're like, okay, we went round 32, like, I don't know. So,
It's just you
uh,
never know. You never know until
you
you're in it.
never know. It's always a mystery, but it's a fun mystery, right? That's why we're all in it. So, so Stephanie, beyond your work as an editor, you're also a strong advocate for women's rights. What does it mean to work on a project like Horsegirls alongside so many other talented, diverse women, both in front of and behind the camera?
Well, so a majority of my career, I feel like, especially in post, I'm always working with other dudes. No offense, John and Daniel, but
Uh,
there's so it's very rare that I actually get to work with like a team of women. And so it was just a really just a special experience and like a different kind of collaboration because in a way you have a bit of a shorthand. But beyond just working with women, I think also, Lillian Carrier, who plays our main character, Margarita, is a neurodivergent actress. She's a very strong advocate for the autism community, and Matthew Schwab is a very strong advocate for the Down syndrome community. And they all lent so much to the story and all of the scenes. They're just like, this is how this should play out, and it was just like really kind of just a cool experience to see how their voices were like heard and respected, and So this project was just kind of a reminder of how cool it is when not only when people have like a seat at the table or like a diverse table as well, but um, their voices are also like listened to and heard and lend so much to the story that maybe you didn't even realize needed to be a part of it. So it was just a really special experience.
I love it. Somehow I end up working with a lot of women. I don't know. And I have to say, I love it. I love it. Like
Maybe they'll
on
do what you
Hacks,
do.
I've got Jen Statsky, and I got Lucia, so we're like holding it down. We've been going for years now, like back to the Broad City days. So
Yeah, you guys have a killer team on that show.
yeah, it's kind of funny. Like I feel like I kind of keep popping into that world. So it's weird that you're like, I'm with dudes, and I'm like, I'm with, but maybe that's a
You're like,
little,
what are you talking about?
I'm like, my experience is different. Um, Okay, so Lauren, uh, how did you approach the rhythm and pacing and sound when editing the moments between Terry and Willie to emphasize their depth and bond?
So yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but there is several moments where Terry is approached by a manta ray that he knows from the past. And in those moments, I really slowed down the pace of the edit, and we had so many beautiful shots of manta rays, and it was just finding the right shots of the right manta rays to really emphasize like the emotion, because they have these like huge eyes. And so if you can find a shot where you see the manta ray eye, like suddenly you're looking in the eye of like a whale or something, like, it's crazy. It's crazy looking how like large and how deep those eyes are. And so finding the shots of the eyes to show like a little bit of, what might be going on in their minds. And then just emphasizing the sheer scale of manta ray to man is enough to kind of show, you don't need like a ton to show like how amazing that relationship must be, because it's like a man and his dragon. That's how it feels to me. And Terry would he would go up to these manta rays and touch them so gently, and they unfurl, and just being able to show in the edit like the size difference between the man and his pet his pet dragon. So um and then the temp score played a really big role in that too. So there were a couple times when I would try temp score and like completely nail it on the first time, because Cody's description of what he wanted those moments to feel like was so like I just got it, or it was so specific. And then there are other times where we had to play around a little bit, or we wanted moments between Terry and the Manta Race to feel slightly different to keep the story moving along. Um, so yeah, it was a lot of like playing around with temp scores and trying to figure out the right balance between um, like having enough tension around those moments so that when you actually breathe in them, it feels like earned and it feels special.
Beautiful. This is like almost sounding like ASM, AMSR, what is it? How do you say it? Someone help me out here, right? There's like,
ASMR, I think.
That's right.
right? A little bit. Um, Danny, what kinds of sounds and textures did you find yourself drawn to when shaping the tone of this world, and how did they help you express the themes?
Yeah, so uh, it was all about the what I've been describing as the digital shoe leather. So the keyboard typing sounds and the writing a note, phone number or something on a piece of paper and tearing the piece of paper like a sound of a pencil scribbling. Um, and that became this sort of like rhythmic bed that is sort of the, you know, sonic signature of the music for the show. And so, then you could have like something with more harmonic content as the theme. In one case, the sort of like revelatory theme of self-discovery, in other cases, the sort of more like uh, where, where does this rabbit hole go, sort of more, anxious sounding music. But in both cases, that sonic signature is there, and I feel like it would help root us very much in the perspective of somebody, like at their computer late at night with just like one lamp on and like the room is dark and they're just like going crazy looking for like one more piece of information. So yeah, and it was funny how I don't think I realized it until afterwards how much it does feel like it really roots us in the POV, which I think is so important when you don't have picture, um, to feel grounded in that way. And I do find myself doing a lot of sound design-ish things when I'm scoring. Um, and as a composer in general, I also have like a personal practice where I like explore our relationship with nature in different ways. And a lot of the ways that I do that is through using sound that you're not sure if it's supposed to be there, you're not sure if it's supposed to be musical, and then like as the thing progresses, it all starts to feel musical, and it's sort of, like using the metaphor of is it sound or music as like a stand-in for the metaphor of like, oh, is it man-made or is it nature? But so in the case of yeah, I feel like I was bringing that kind of mindset, which was a thing I was doing a lot at the beginning of COVID lockdown, to this score as well.
It's like music concrete approach, right? Like
Mhm,
Luke Ferrari would be proud.
mhm.
To wrap us up, I want to hear from everyone. How did working on this story impact your own perspective or creative journey? And what do you hope the audiences take away from it? Steph, we'll go with you first.
Um, I don't know that this movie changed my perspective, but I think it definitely like enhanced for me the importance of telling stories of underrepresented people. Um, I think we're in such a scary time in our industry where almost the only things that are getting greenlit are like really big budget things. Um, so I just think it kind of just emphasized for me the importance of really advocating for stories like this to be told and for, different voices to be heard and people to have seats at the table and to be heard and respected in that way. Um, and I hope that the audience takes the same thing away from it. Honestly, I think it's, just to me, I just hope that it's, despite the scary times in our industry, that it's something that we can all kind of push for to make sure that all these interesting, unique, original stories can be told.
I hope so.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Lauren?
So I think the biggest theme in the movie, in my opinion, is about the importance of friendship. And in Terry's case, it's cross species. But at the end of the film is very much like, about this guy reflecting on his life and what it meant. And the conclusion he comes to is that life is all about the friends you have, and especially the friends you have at the end. And I think that's a really poignant message that um, we all kind of know, but to work on something where it feels that foregrounded, it just reminded me of the importance of prioritizing the well-being of your friendships. And, I think especially as editors who are always siloed, right? It's important to remember that our relationships outside of what we do are just as important as the relationships that we have, either professionally or with our own work. So, yeah, the importance of keeping your friends close and making sure that you have lifelong friends is really the sort of takeaway that I took from it.
I agree. That's beautiful. I have a friend that's like moving upstate, and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna see you again, but we're gonna hug right now because who knows, You got to take every moment you can with your pal. So yeah, this one's for you. We're kind of
Okay, okay.
wrap up like, the what'd you take away from this?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like uh personally, the takeaway is it's awesome to work with your pals, with people that you have history with. That it's always nice to be reminded that, sort of like Steph was talking about the challenging times of the industry, and I feel like in a way this project is sort of rooted in a version of that. This was the sort of challenging time of COVID, which was a very sort of roller coastery time, I think, for a lot of people, where it was like there was a lot of opportunity and a lot of things being made, but also like a lot of things that got killed because just the environment changed so rapidly. And now I just remember during that time thinking to myself, what is this industry going to look like in 5 years? Like, how do I prepare myself or keep myself, keep my career sort of like healthy given everything that's going to happen, and feeling sort of unable to plan, and it turns out that I feel exactly the same way right now, and in fact more so, I think, because even the technological changes that are coming and things, it's just like really hard to know what things are going to look like. And at the end of the day, what you do know is you have those relationships with your collaborators, and we're all asking the same questions. We're all facing the same uncertainty. And that's really what the show is about in a way. I mean, it extends beyond being a creative person or being a filmmaker. But yeah, like those relationships are the ultimate through line, and so it's yeah, I'm glad I got to yeah, it just reminds me to like be attentive to those long-term relationships, and always be checking with people, seeing how they're doing. I think right now is such an important time. Every time I go to an event where I see people or I meet new people, it's like all we're all talking about is like there we have like this commonality in that we're all drawn to this kind of work you know for various reasons, and we're all worried about not just ourselves, but like the tradition of being a storyteller, the tradition of being an artist. Like in a way, that tradition is more important than ever. It's more threatened than ever. It's just um and like there's a part of you where it's you feel like the work is more devalued than ever, and then there's another part of you that's like, so you have to just scream louder, and that's sort of what the show feels like to me, is a kind of, if you're thinking about all the different ways your life could have gone, but you're in the version where you became an artist, and you're like, I might as well just be a very stubborn, unshakable, super high conviction artist, rather than being like, is this really, what's next? How am I going to survive? Whatever. And it extends, by the way, beyond our industry, right? Like I think there's a lot of industries right now that are in turmoil, because of a lot of the things that are going on. But um, you know, we're still here.
That we are still here. And, I guess we'll keep, making friends. I hope that all of us can continue, as this will be the intro of our friendship. And then we can keep going from here. Um, and hopefully we can all make creative projects and work on creative projects, because, it is at the end of the day the best thing to be a part of something that's creative and interesting, and, you know, shapes the world in a more beautiful way. So on that, looks like this is the time that we have left. That's it for our little panel. I want to thank all of you for joining me, Stephanie, Daniel, Danny, and Lauren, for being here today to discuss your incredible work and important work. Thank you to Behind the Camera House and Impact 24 PR. It's been a pleasure. I hope you guys enjoy the little conversation here. And this is me signing off.